All right, everybody. Good day to all of you guys listening out there. I'm very excited to have Michael Renz from Gnosis join us for this episode on the Silq podcast. We're here to talk about global trade and how Gnosis and Silq comes together. In full transparency, Silq uses Gnosis. We're a very happy customer of the Gnosis platform for visibility data for our customers. So we're very excited to have him on board. Tell us about what he's been seeing in the market, talking to customers. I'm going to let him quickly jump and introduce himself and introduce Gnosis as well. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. Appreciate you having me on the podcast. Like you mentioned, I'm Michael Renz. I'm the CRO of Gnosis Freight. We're in the business of international container data as well as international container management tooling. We combine those two things into our own category that we call container lifecycle management. Basically replacing the old SOP when it comes to moving containers internationally around the world, which still today for a lot of people is just emailing Excel spreadsheets back and forth between all the different parties and then cross-checking all the different websites, so the different ocean carrier websites, port and terminal websites, et cetera. So trying to simplify that and invert that problem on its head and allow our customers to manage the exceptions, and we'll identify them.
Lovely. Actually, when you brought that up, you probably saw the smirk on my face. I joke around to people. I think the biggest supply chain software competitor in the world, I don't care which company you are, is Microsoft Excel. Everybody just loves Excel. That's pretty much how information gets passed around. And this is all the way from Walmart to the first-time importer in the world, right? It's amazing that you bring that up. And I also joke around about how data on an Excel sheet expires the minute you open it, static data, and you want to keep that updated. So very excited for this conversation. I think my background, having come from Flexport and building Silq for the last 5 years, I have a lot of opinions about how visibility was touted to be the most important thing in the business during COVID. And I think that world has evolved. So perhaps maybe in your own words, Michael, what does visibility mean in 2025? This is the post-COVID world. What are you seeing? What is your take on the situation?
Yeah, that's a big, broad question to start. But I think to define visibility, you have to introduce a time series. So you can think about backwards looking visibility, which I think was like V1 of the visibility movement. You have forward looking visibility, being able to forecast and project what may or may not happen. How do you plan and allocate resources, whatever they may be. And then you have real time, like actual visibility, like what's happening right this second. And that's probably the appropriate lens to look at it. And there's all kinds of advancements that unlock different components of that. We've primarily made a name for ourselves in the real-time actual visibility, as well as the forecasted visibility, pattern recognition, what's actually going to happen in the future, as opposed to backwards-looking BI tooling, evaluation data. So I think defining it that way first will probably help us answer the question a little bit better.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Like I was part of the early team at Flexport, right? This is early 2015, late 14, early 15, when we used to go out there. Obviously, it was game changing then, and still believe Flexport is game changing even today. But I think one of the most common pushbacks that we would get is, what is the point of knowing if the ship is in the middle of the ocean? It's in the middle of the ocean, not really going to do anything with that data. That was the naysayers' response when we talked about visibility. But to your point, it's about forecasting what happens next. What is the action that I need to take to make sure the shipment is moving seamlessly and it's not going to get blocked along the way? That essentially is the future. But it's not easy. It's very hard. Is the problem, in your opinion, a lack of structured data to be able to forecast what happens next? Because there are port terminals, there's a whole ecosystem that needs to be willing to share data.
That's definitely part of it. That's a component of the foundation for sure. I think understanding the context or why people want data, and our general assumption, which informs the structure of the data as well, is that people want to use data. They don't want to see data. And if you're looking at data, something went wrong. The best data you don't really see, you're just using it. And that's typically some type of software or processes or services. And so I think that's a good barometer of like how useful is the data. And I think a good example of that is like a BI tool that looks backwards. What was my performance last quarter? You're looking at data. It's not that useful for forward looking generally. But if you're working on getting a container unstuck or avoiding demurrage or detention, or getting a container delivered to a warehouse on time, you're not looking at the actual data. You're looking at whatever sits on top of it that needs to happen in order to facilitate what the other party bargained for.
Some of the more interesting conversations I have sometimes is when customers come to us and tell us that, oh, I do not like to use a particular carrier. I don't know, I don't like to use MSC because 2 years ago they did this to my container and now I don't want to use this carrier now. I'm like, hey, let's be very clear. That's not how this works. We try to rationalize things with them saying, you need to stop looking at backward looking data to your point and be able to say what's going to happen next. What kind of tools are available today for importer? Let's take, for example, containers that go through the Middle East or the Cape of Good Hope, around the Cape of Good Hope, as against the Suez. What kind of tools are out there for customers, like scheduled reliability at a carrier level or a service level? Is that something that's easier today than, let's say, a couple of years ago?
Yes, but it goes back to the previous question, which is like the structure of the data and like the schedule reliability. There's an endpoint misconception of how it's communicated to the end user. So a carrier may say the vessel has arrived or it's going to arrive, but that's never the issue. It's really more of what do they mean by arrive?
Yeah.
And that's not consistent across the carriers. Some will say the vessel has arrived and it's actually anchored in the harbor or idling in the ocean. They'll say the vessel has arrived and it's received a berth. It's almost an infinite number of different patterns or combinations that you need to decode in order to be able to use that data.
Yeah.
You're just looking at one isolated data set, let's just say carrier data, it will probably not be sufficient to de-risk decisions in the future.
Gotcha.
Which you need to have the ability to acquire a variety of different pieces of data across the life cycle of a container, for lack of a better phrase. That's why we say it. So that would be the carriers, the ports, terminals, the rail carriers, the satellite data, customs data, and you might get 7 different ETAs for one container. And then what do you do with that and which combination, and understanding ultimately what the end user of the data wants to use the data for so that you can contextualize it, I think is a more appropriate question, because ultimately it's a team effort. It's in supply chain or international logistics is really a loose collection of a lot of different industries, and they're all relying on that information to ultimately get the container where it needs to go.
It's called a supply chain for a reason. It's like a relay race, and you want that information handoff to happen seamlessly, which is what we all strive to achieve at this point. Curious, from your perspective, right? What are the symptoms that you see in an importer that you would say are like signs that an importer should be like, I need to invest in getting a CLM tool, a container lifecycle management tool? What are the problems you would say, clear symptoms?
Yeah, the most glaring one is going to be really high demurrage and detention.
Okay.
That's like the most obvious one. The amount of hours deployed on finding accurate information. If you have a team of more than a few people, or just anyone in general, dedicated to aggregating Excel files from 15 different carriers and or partners, and then checking websites, like that can be solved today. That's why I say we give people their lives back. You should be able to think critically what's going to be the best decision for the overall business. And I just think that having a human being aggregate Excel files and cross-check websites every single day is an efficient use of their time. So if it's a combination of those things, there's a really high asset-based bill that's avoidable, that wasn't planned for, or an inefficient use of human capital, is typically a good entry point for software and or data to make a good business case.
Interesting. I agree with you. I think sometimes I feel like it's also about the time of the year, right? Or essentially port congestion related when it comes to demurrage and detention specifically. Do you see that impacting how customers perceive the need for a CLM tool when, frankly, right now, the ports might be a little bit more emptier, and which means the chances of you being able to pull containers out is literally easier. Do you think it makes it harder to expect or explain the value of a CLM tool at this point in time?
Totally. Every organization is different in how aggressive or progressive or conservative they may be from a business perspective on how they want to invest or what's important or what gets prioritized. Some big BCOs have a chief logistics officer. Some have international logistics roll up through ops. Some have supply. So it really varies by organization, which can typically be identified via commodity. You're just in time, automotive or OEM or supplier manufacturing are going to have probably a bit more sophisticated because they have to, because the downstream partners are more heavily reliant on that. And so
Yeah.
they may be a bit more aggressive, but there's always seasonality traditionally in our industry. It feels like the seasonality has increased. There's like a new season every year of people trying to avoid peak.
Yeah.
And it means something different depending on where you are in the world.
Like,
But it always is easier to sell to a group of people at a business, the buying center. There's probably 8 to 10 different stakeholders involved in making a CLM decision.
yeah.
And only a third of those are probably even in international logistics or even know what demurrage and detention is. But I promise you, a CFO knows what it is when all of a sudden it spikes unbelievably like it did in COVID, and all of a sudden have a CFO going, what the hell is demurrage? And that makes it a little bit easier to sell something. It's been somewhat more docile lately, but there's always something that pops up, whether it's a boat that crashes into a bridge or
Yeah.
a terrorist attack in the Red Sea or whatever
Yeah.
it may be. There's an infinite supply of disruptions that make things a bit more costly that seem to pique people's interest a bit more during those times.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually brings me to a question, right? I think there was a huge flurry of CLM providers or visibility providers. I think there's also a specific term for this category of business that came out during COVID and post-COVID. And when we were evaluating different providers, I have a clear idea why we picked Gnosis. Data integrity amongst a whole bunch of other factors, tech forward, being able to integrate easily amongst other things, flexible pricing plans. I need to call that out as well for sure. Curious on what you think is making Gnosis stand out in the market compared to all the other providers out there. And there's quite a few.
From a data perspective, it's probably most driven by the fact that we didn't set out to be a data provider. 5 years ago, we set out to provide tooling.
Yeah.
And we were actually in the market just like y'all were, buying data from a variety of different providers that people now may perceive as our competitors. And we got tired of having to communicate to our customers why data was incomplete or insufficient or inaccurate, and set out to try to build our own data model. And it worked well enough to where we could power our own software and tooling with our own data. And we were selling that to the BCOs, but then the market, for lack of a better phrase, found out about our data, and we made that available as a product via API. And then that became very fast selling for us. And now it's pretty much even. We have about half our customers are data customers, half are software.
Gotcha.
I think the data problem was a 40-year problem. And I think the fidelity that we have with how we evaluate data, again, because we're customers of our data, we use our data. So we have a very high of how good it needs to be in order to use it. And I think we just raised the bar a little bit. And there's a huge gap between something being 80% complete and 98% complete. And really 80% complete data might as well be 0%, because logistics teams aren't going to rely on it. They're going to go back to doing what they were doing before. So we created what we would call operational grade data for people in the weeds, data for people that are moving containers in and out of the port and terminal every day, whose job's on the line, whose KPI is keeping demurrage and detention low and on-time delivery high to the inland warehouse, things like that. We created data for operators. I think that's the main difference, is the use case.
Gotcha. That actually brings me to this question. So can software actually compensate for infrastructure or data gaps? Because
Yes and no.
I know, to your point, like 85% data is good, it might as well be 0%. How do you enhance data?
Know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So take something like invoice auditing. We have a financial operations suite. That's maybe our fastest growing part of our software. And it turns out we have a bunch of big importers now that use it to audit all different types of invoices. And from our numbers, it looks like 85% of all invoice inaccuracies are due to the logistics milestones. And so like a third-party auditing company wouldn't be able to catch that. Was it supposed to be $200 a day or $250? They know that. But what they don't know was, when did the container discharge? When was the last free day? And that's the root cause of the discrepancy. And so you have to know what you're looking for first.
Gotcha.
And that's not necessarily infrastructure. And then in a way that it's not really going to help is like, it's a fixed system. There's a fixed amount of capacity on the ocean. There's a fixed amount of chassis. There's a fixed amount of trucking capacity. And sometimes, like we saw with the pandemic, when you have a combination of labor shortages, plus you exceed the capacity of the system, there's nothing that's going to help that. But you can try to be as proactive as possible if you can forecast that out into the future and try to avoid maybe more high density places as opposed to right into the lion's den.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So do you think there are particular spots that are a little bit more dark spots or blind spots necessarily when it comes to visibility and data versus certain areas a little bit more sophisticated? One of the more common perceptions that we have is that certain parts of Europe, certain ports, specifically in Europe, or certain ports in China are way more sophisticated. It's whether it's automation in the terminals or whether the way they report data out is a lot more robust compared to certain parts of the world where it might not be as much. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, based off of mature versus emerging markets, the level of sophistication with regards to the data that you're going to get a hold of is there's a correlation there. You do see the big multinational conglomerates investing in certain port infrastructure hotspots around the world, which helps. So that is definitely true. We always say if there's data available, we can get it for you. We have some predictive data that can fill some gaps, and that'll probably segue into AI.
Yeah.
But it's really, you don't want to be reliant on one provider of a certain milestone. Okay. And what's important is to establish a few layers of redundancy. And that's really what changes. Like we have global visibility for all of the different types of milestones with how a container would move internationally. The milestone that we give our customers, that doesn't change. We have the same coverage. The depth of the redundancy behind the milestone itself is what does change. And that's governed or informed by the level of sophistication of the geography. And so in an African port, you may only get one data. You may only be able to get a data point from the ocean carrier. As coming into LA Long Beach or Charleston or Savannah or New York, you might have 7 different data sources that you can really get sophisticated on predicting and figuring out who's telling the truth and when and why. It's a combination of those things. But that'll, like I said, that'll lead into AI and machine learning, the underlying architecture to be able to fill the gaps.
Yeah. Are these gaps technical or more geopolitical, operational? Where would you say the majority lies? I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that question.
It's definitely geopolitical in a sense of just sophistication of infrastructure. There are literally just some places where there are no milestones.
Gotcha.
Available anywhere.
Yeah.
So that is truly a black box.
Yeah.
Time will fix that, hopefully. Technical, I think, we figured it out. I think it's a discoverable problem. You just have to have the right analysis to figure out what you're looking at.
Yeah. I mean, in this day and age of AI, right, I think as long as the data exists somewhere in whatever format it is, taking it and digesting it and making it, harmonizing it is not the challenge as much. It's more about making the data available. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah. AI is very powerful at taking unstructured data and turning it into structured data in real time at scale. We've been using that for a long time.
Yeah.
And then, so there's a lot of AI that just happens in the background that I think people don't even realize is AI. And then the tooling itself, that's AI, that people seem to be fanatic about.
So I have this thesis, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, right? The whole wave of AI and LLMs and how that's going to change the world. There is all this talk about how it's going to take away jobs and everything. And my thesis is that the first place this is going to impact is not even so much American jobs, but more so about jobs that are being outsourced to other countries, which is more BPO jobs, customer service, track and trace, visibility, like to your point, people who fill out Excel sheets, amongst other things. And logistics has a lot of that. There's a huge industry of back office support companies in Philippines and India and other places that support just basically filling Excel sheets and getting it out. Do you think that, I have a feeling that those are the jobs that are going to get first affected and impacted because of the advancement of AI? To be honest, rightfully, I think there's definitely a certain level of integrity improvement when it's done through a machine model versus a human pushing data into an Excel sheet. What do you say to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When you sell traditional SaaS or cloud-based, whatever, the biggest competitor is outsourced labor. And it's easy to sell software to companies in a mature market, but when you have to compete with 100 people that could do whatever your software could do, that's the game now. Will AI become cheaper than an infinite number of human beings doing something? Maybe for part of it, maybe for something like data. It ultimately really depends on the business and the ROI that you can communicate to the business and like the way that they're set up in a sense. So maybe with data, there are some people that think data is a commodity. And I think it's important. It's not an apples to apples comparison. Let's say there's 10 table stakes milestones that everybody provides, ETD, whatever. That may be true. That's commoditized, but there's another bucket of milestones that are predictive milestones or new milestones in general. There's no apples to apples comparison, and there's nowhere to look for that. So that may be evaluated differently. And then software in general, which, and I say this as a software provider because I don't want to be cheaper than human labor.
Yeah.
I want the impact and the value that we create to be recognized and people to understand the top line or bottom line or however they want to evaluate it, the impact it makes on their business. And so I don't think the competition, I agree with you that it will probably displace some of those BPO type jobs overseas. But I think it would be doing a disservice to the market to make that the primary objective, the primary competitive, something like advanced technology.
This whole gripe against how technology might take jobs away is a little misplaced. I feel it is advancing just development overall, and this is just part of evolution. That's how we feel about it. This is not intended to take jobs away. This is intended to make whatever business process more efficient. That's how I would position it.
Yeah.
I actually have an anecdote to share with you. Back in the day, one of my previous companies, I don't want to go into specifics in the name, but we used to have an outsourced team in the Philippines whose job was to basically call a particular warehouse, and there was a consolidated container coming in. You would call the particular warehouse and check for availability of that shipment. And this team in the Philippines would call the warehouse at 9 a.m. and be like, hey, where's the shipment with a specific reference number? And the warehouse would be like, the shipment is in a container, the container is in the ocean, we don't know. And the guy would be like, okay, cool, boom. And then at noon, he'd be like, I'm going to call again and be like, hey, where's this container right now? And they'd be like, I told you at 9 a.m., it's in the middle of the ocean. There's no way it made it to the warehouse. And then he would do it again at 4 o'clock because that's what the process told you to do. So those are the kind of things that need to essentially change. We can't continue to operate that way. At one point, it got to a place where the warehouse would blacklist that number and be like, don't pick up this call. Yeah. It makes no sense.
Yeah, we're heading in the right direction. No pun intended. Yeah. Its system is getting more efficient, I think. I also think that to design a system to think that it would be perfectly efficient would be unwise.
Yeah.
And you want a system that can surface anomalies.
Yeah.
And the whole idea or the framework of human in the loop, I think, is like the proper balance of tooling, whether it's AI or whatever it is, and like business critical utility. So we'll see. We're definitely, I don't know if there's been anything like agentic AI as rapidly being deployed into a workforce. I'm not familiar with an example as quickly as things are changing. So whether you like it or not, we're in it and we're figuring it out together. And there's still a lot more things that have to happen.
Absolutely. No, I don't disagree at all. That brings me to this point about how we feel at Silq about what technology can do, and frankly, our perspective on logistics technology overall. I've always strongly believed that no two supply chains are the same. It's the unique DNA of the company. It's about time that supply chain and logistics was not just perceived as a cost center, but more so as a competitive advantage, right? It's not just about where you source your products. It's a very big deal. And frankly, in today's tariff environment, it's a very big deal. But more importantly, also knowing where your cargo is, being able to forecast and plan and procure. It's a pretty big deal. It's a competitive advantage. And the one thing that I feel like I call it the first version of logistics technology that probably took shape in 2013, 14, 15, that's evolved today. I think what that first version or the first wave of innovation got wrong was trying to force every company to fit into a particular model the way technology was built. And to my point, I think what we're trying to do differently this time is we realize that every customer is different. Every supply chain is different. Every operator is different. And so building tooling that is customizable is probably the way we think about it, right? How can my tool, Silq's platform, adapt to a particular customer's needs? And making it very customizable is how it comes down to. What do you say to that?
I think we're reading from the same sheet of music. That's exactly what we preach. We don't say customizable as much as we say configurable. Yeah. Because some people don't like the word customizable, but
fair enough.
You're talking about a very old industry and a lot of like legacy families and people that have come up in the industry. And for an importer, for the sake of this example, there might be 10 different steps. Everybody does 10 steps and everybody does 8 of the 10 the exact same.
Yeah.
but they do those one or two differently. And in
Mm-hmm.
their minds, those one or two steps that they do differently is their competitive advantage. There was a general butting of heads when you
Mm-hmm.
would ask a logistics team or logistics company to jump into a box of software, whether it was a big system of record, and it's okay, you got to change the way you work completely and
Mm-hmm.
adopt this process in order to use this tool. And there just wasn't adoption.
Yeah.
And so that's Austin, our CEO. I saw it. He made a presentation in 2017, which was spooky looking back. And when he started Gnosis, it was just in his dorm room, really. The only thing he knew he wanted to do was he wanted to use technology to unlock change management as opposed to change management to unlock technology. And
Yeah.
that was somewhat prophetic in a sense, but that was like the whole guiding principle of how he wanted to build, arrange, or use software for people. And it sounds like y'all do the exact same thing, and it seems to work really well in an industry
Yeah.
like ours.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree. I think it made what you mentioned about how Austin thinks about it is 100% true, and I can validate it from having first row seats. One point in my life at a previous company, again, we spend millions of dollars, man. I'm not even kidding, like an obscene amount of millions of dollars on trying to get suppliers to adopt to a particular tooling on how they submit booking.
Yeah.
And in a fragmented industry like ours, right? Again, I think the last count is like 12,000 forwarders, NVOCCs or something like that in America. And you go out to all these factories in Asia and they're like, hey, we work with 30 customers who work with each of their own forwarders. And you can't be the only special snowflake who wants me to use this particular tool. I have this process down to a wire. I have an Excel sheet. This is what I'm going to give. Take it or leave it, right?
Yeah.
It's very hard to drive change unless, to your point, not put the cart before the horse. It's about how you leverage technology to drive change management.
That's right. You got to meet them where they are.
Exactly.
And if it's good tooling, if it's good technology, then they won't even realize there's been change management.
Yeah.
You'll just wake up 90, 180 days later and it's, like there's been adoption and guess what? Change management. So
yeah,
I'm full agreement with you. That's good.
No, to your point, you said like you got to meet them where they are. Now, tell me about this. I know you guys have global customers. It's not just America. You guys sell all around the world. Would you be able to paint a rough picture if you were to say US versus other countries? Would you say there is, what would that percentage split look like roughly?
There's certainly a handful of big customers that are like truly global, whether it's like ocean carriers or service providers or other big BCOs that skew the overall number.
Yeah.
I would say generally is probably 60 to 70% US import volume, just the nature of the economics.
The maturity as well.
Yeah.
The reason I ask that is, again, one of the anecdotal evidence we have is that work happens in all different bunch of places. There's email, there's WeChat, there's WhatsApp, there is a whole bunch of different places. What's your take to getting people to harmonize all that? Is there some effort that you guys are doing to be like, hey, we're going to channel communication across all these places onto the Gnosis platform? Is that an effort as well?
Yeah, it's not a one-to-one replication. It's can we synthesize all the information that's being shared and intercept it? And then again, understand the context for which they're collecting that information and enable those people to act upon it. And so that's like an efficiency gain, whether it's intercepting emails or just having a general understanding, like what are you even using WeChat or WhatsApp for? What are you trying to accomplish? And then once you can understand that, then you can bring a plethora of information and experience across other customers, across the entire customer base to give them a few options. I know you're doing it this way and we're happy to meet you there. Keep doing it, but we'd like to introduce an alternative way that accomplishes the same task, but in a slightly different way, and just feel them out. Like, what are they comfortable with? If they don't, sometimes you get people that don't want to change at all. It's okay. Keep sending these emails and we'll automate them and intercept them and ingest the information and scrape it out programmatically and then surface it and give it to whoever it is.
Yeah.
Everything as rudimentary as that is like an API and a webhook of the information.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. We're coming up towards the end here. I think it's time we address the elephant in the room, which is the impact of tariffs on our business. And I know you guys don't really drive, and neither do we. Our customers decide where they ship from. But are you seeing any early patterns of a demand for visibility out of countries that you weren't seeing a huge spike in? Is that changing? Are you guys seeing that shift yet of migration?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's more of an acceleration of the slow creep that's been like decoupling from China in a variety of different places. And there's different design constraints in that equation. The main one being the size of the infrastructure of the vessels. and those big vessels can't call some of these alternative origins.
Yeah.
And so the network of the ocean carriers really is the design constraint there. But yeah, I think the smart importers, BCOs, are already started the process of diversifying their production. And we're intelligent and wise enough to have enough capacity to ramp up or down depending on volatility. I don't think they anticipated something like as big of a tariff to essentially cancel all bookings out of China for 6 weeks, basically, is what happened. And if they had the ability to ramp up production somewhere else, they would. But a lot of people just canceled bookings and waited for there to be a moratorium. So definitely, I think we're about as globalized as you could possibly be. So I think you can only swing back in the other direction. And I think the current administration has been pretty clear on which commodities they actually do want to reshore. And believe it or not, I think the administration has done what they said they were going to do, which in politics is
it's a tall ask.
is the outlier. So they're like, whoa, that was crazy that they said that. And then they actually did it. So yeah, I think you're going to see some reshoring of certain commodities. And I think people are planning for that. And I don't think it'll put that huge of a dent in the total container freight. But I do think there'll be certain changes.
Do you think, in your opinion, again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. Do you think this is more about de-risking the American supply chain from being over-reliant on a single country? Or is this more about trying to bring production back to America and manufacture here in the US? What do you think is a short-term outcome and a long-term outcome out of this effort?
Yeah, no, it's probably both. There's definitely a risk, for sure. You can't be a nation state who's 100% dependent on defense production or pharmaceutical microchip processors and things like that. That is a national security risk by definition. From a production perspective, it's probably the last chance you get at a supply side stimulus to grow your way out of the debt situation. It's been such top down, like stimulus driven, that this is probably the last opportunity to try to get the debt to GDP ratio right. And try to unlock growth to grow your way out of it, which I think is what Secretary Bessent has given guidance on. And so they're going for it. That's the controversy over the big, beautiful bill and the spending bill, is that they didn't actually cut it. But if you really read the crosstabs, they're trying to create a supply side stimulus. So I think they're going for it. I think it's possible. And the different weekly prints, CPI, are somewhat exceeding expectations. So I think you got to go for it.
36 trillion is nothing to sneeze at. It's a pretty sizable chunk of debt.
And we're all guilty. So we're all guilty. And so I'm okay to go for it and see what happens. And then, because if you don't, you're just going to be out of hand. We'll see what happens.
Something's going to give. I don't disagree with you at all. 36 trillion is not a small feat. And then also, I think from a national security standpoint, things have to change. The question is how it gets implemented. To your point, right, I think there is going to be collateral damage here. We're seeing, frankly, on our side, a lot of our customers, there was a little bit of front loading, not as much as it's being touted in the media, but there is a fair bit of uncertainty. And I'll be honest, right, at some point, it's very hard for customers and importers to forecast because it takes 60 to 90 days lead time to produce something and then another 30 to 45 days to ship something. And if you can't forecast if the product you're buying in China is $100, or wherever for that matter, if it's $100 120 days from now, or is it $250 120 days from now? It's a pretty big deal. It's seismic. So that uncertainty is a little frustrating.
I know, but that's been the governing principle the last 5 years. Is I wish people would just somewhat unify an agreement or disagreement. It's either going to go up or it's going to go down, but it's the uncertainty that really freezes people. And I always say international logistics people have an impossible job. Their job is to predict the future. And so I tend to think about the downstream effects of decisions. That's where our customers live. And the tariffs resulted in a pretty obvious sequence of events. You got canceled bookings. Or before that, you had people that paid attention to the guidance and had a new peak season and moved a bunch of goods into bonded warehouses domestically. They stacked up goods at origin. Then the tariffs hit, canceled all the bookings. The carriers did blank sailings, waited to see what was going to happen. And then what's going to happen after that is the tariffs were lifted temporarily. There was an influx of goods. There was a strain on the capacity of the system end to end. And then what's happening now is we're going into a double peak season in a sense where there's a surge of goods trying to avoid the tariffs, equipment shortages, which leads to demurrage and detention and things like that. So trying to help our customers like anticipate that and absorb those shocks and plan as intelligently as possible.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree.
International logistics, though.
It's an interesting time to be here. A lot of people are losing sleep over it. Some people are even losing jobs over it. It's a tough time for some of those companies out there. We've seen some importers have a real tough time, but I think overall there's a lot happening. There's no shortage of activity happening around the world. Actually, I had a question. I want to go back a couple steps. It's not directly relevant to the conversation. I want to come back to this, but before I forget, I want to ask this, right? I think I go to TPM every year religiously. It's like a big college reunion out in Long Beach. I know you guys have a pretty big, you guys do the cross-country drive and all that. It's in exciting times. One of the things that really gets me to no end, it really gets me going is I sit there in these conferences and I hear carriers come in and be like, we had 80% on-time performance, 96% on-time performance. I still feel like at some level, all those numbers are meaningless because at the end of the day, it's not about when the vessel departs and arrives. It's also about when the container, my particular container departed or got on the vessel, did not get rolled, made it through the transshipment port, got to the destination and made available. That's what really matters. Yeah. At what point are we going to be able to report on-time performance at a container level as against at a vessel level, the way it's happening?
We do it. We have all the information. So not to beat a dead horse, but that's why we came up with the term container lifecycle management. Yeah. Is because the container itself has its own life cycle that transcends just the ocean haulage, port to port. Yeah. And it was obvious to us, the last great innovation in our industry was the invention of the container. Yeah, that's what unified, and everybody adopted or adjusted their systems to incorporate that unit. But nobody built an operating system or a model around the container. They would do it for the port-to-port ocean haulage, or they would do it for the port and terminal. But nobody decided to unify it around the container itself.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. It was obvious. But so if you're interested in that, which is a better metric, which is what is the performance of the container itself, delivers at destination and empty return, that life cycle evaluation is, I think, a bit more substantial.
Have you actually, anecdotally, can you share any evidence of any customer of yours particularly using that data when a carrier during contract negotiation comes in and says, hey, we've had whatever, 80%, 90% on-time performance, and then somebody comes and says, nope, here's my data on my containers. It was substantially lower. Have you had any interactions along those lines?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's the BCOs love it. They're on offense. And it's the obvious parts like that, like on-time performance, utilization, evaluating against the terms of the contract, SLAs, et cetera. But then it's also non-obvious things like payment terms. And you're saying, oh, we actually paid you on average 6 days quicker. And we know because of this and this, so we want a preferred rate. And so when you have accurate data and you trust the data and you have accurate systems and tooling and you trust it, it's fine to release payment. Why not? If you know it's accurate. Yeah, it's amazing what can happen when there's accuracy and efficiency in a way that's non-refutable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to have to do a part 2 at some point because I have a lot more questions on that particular level of conversation. But before we part, I have one last question for you, and then we'll give people a break on hearing us talk. What's your one piece of advice for U.S. importers who might be switching production, whether it's from China to a different country or, frankly, to an emerging economy? What would be your one piece of advice today?
Think in terms of a 50 to 100 year cycle change. And because it's a paradigm shift, like the current administration, you look at the guidance they've given, and they've restructured all of the global commercial contracts, all of the trade agreements with every single country. Yeah. And the United States just isn't the world's hegemon anymore. Mm-hmm. Go back to Francis Fukuyama and the end of history in the mid-90s, and the United States became the world's hegemon after the collapse of communism, which kind of really boosted globalism. The United States Navy ensured the success of globalization. They're the ones patrolling the Strait to Malacca and all these different places.
We were the guardians of global trade, putting it simply.
It's not as unipolar anymore. It's multipolar. And the guidance is that the United States is probably going to have a more hemispheric approach from the Panama Canal to the North Pole, probably be a bit more isolationist. Doesn't mean that they won't step into different regions of the world if they have to. But that's really the guidance. And I don't think they're kidding. And so I would probably keep that in mind when you're making heavy infrastructure investments.
Gotcha.
That's probably the biggest difference now as opposed to 5 years ago or 10 years ago is I think that pendulum has swung as far as it can go. And there's some emergence of some new world powers, and it's going to be a bit more, hopefully harmonious and a bit more multipolar as opposed to unipolar. So that would be my advice.
Nice. So again, just probably it's more North America focused. So you're saying, hey, it's going to be countries like Mexico or even some of the slightly more Guatemala, Costa Rica. That's where you would see the influence of the U.S. government essentially extending.
Yeah, from an American perspective, for sure. I'm extremely bullish on Mexico, but just a regional perspective.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be as offshore. I think it'll be a bit more fractured. You're going to see the emergence of intra-region carriers, more carriers, I think will join. And I think it'd be more important to have software and data then because there's going to be more sources of information. It's not going to be as consolidated at the top, would be my guess.
Then you guys got your work cut out in front of you because a lot of those economies we're talking about, you're going to have to go build infrastructure in a lot of these places to get the visibility you need if a business are going to invest there. So it's going to be an interesting time. I'm actually surprised to hear some of that because we've seen a lot of our customers move to exotic locations. I have one of our biggest customers who moved production to Madagascar. Like, I don't know how you guys picked that out, but that's working out great for them. It's interesting times indeed, my friend. There's going to be a lot of changes coming up. There's going to be a lot of shifts that we're preparing for.
Same. It sounds like I said, we sing from the same sheet of music. And I'm always impressed at how y'all solve problems and more importantly, take care of your customers. And I'm glad that y'all find value in the data.
Absolutely.
That's what it's there to do is enhance whatever your competitive advantage is. So I appreciate it, man.
No, absolutely. To your point, maybe I'll just close it with this. One of our values that we can vibe hard at Silq is that impart knowledge, not data. I don't think customers want data. It's about how you take that data and make insights out of it and communicate information that's knowledge. So I think we share that trait across both the companies. With that, thank you. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it. We will likely have to do a part 2. I have a lot more questions for you on how this data has influenced a lot of the BCOs to make decisions. We'll come back to you at another time, but thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's listening. We look forward to, please send us any questions you might have in the comments and we'll make sure we make time for it and get back to you guys. And definitely hit up Gnosis if you're looking for more visibility and not just as visibility as to where your containers are. It's about how to make sure that you react to what needs to get done to make sure your containers get moving on time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.